the title of this is Navigating Naviance. But just because names can be confusing, Naviance is the company that runs this website, but the section that you can see on the top of your sheet, the section that you will be dealing with as a family is the part of Naviance called Family Connection. All right? And this thing is, as I said, at Pine Lake Prep, they're going to be buying this thing, I believe, next year, so you'll start to have the full benefits of it. But this part, wherever you see Naviance, and it's sort of like a purple theme, this is the back end of it where the counselors work. And it's been a godsend for counselors because it's this great database where we can keep track of all of our kids. We can load their test scores in here, load their GPAs in here. We can, I'll show you how we correspond with families this way. Whenever we have like a mass email to send out, we can very easily click students and parents, grade 12, give a message, or grade 10, or all three, and really quick way for us to communicate with parents, so it's really, really good for that. But the best part is clearly how we deal with our students. And we will be occasionally, because it works best when you look at actual kids, I'll be bringing you to a couple of actual kids. We'll have sort of a gentleman's confidentiality agreement. If you see somebody you know and their GPA, don't go home and say, hey, guess what, I saw your kid has a 1.2. But what I've done is I've set up this fake, we're the Chargers, so I created this fake student called Mary Charger. So here's sort of, again, we're still in our end of it, Mary Charger, and we keep all of her scores in here. I made up these DSAT and SAT and ACT and subject test scores and AP scores for this kid, so these will all go into any sort of information about her. When we first meet with Mary, we start with, I'll show you my daughter with sort of live applications, but when we're starting with students, we've had a meeting with them, and we've asked both you as parents and the students about initial preferences, whether it's bigger picture things like public versus private, in-state, does your son or daughter want to stay within driving distance of home, or sort of, let's look at the whole country. What does she want to study? Is this a potential engineering kid? Is this a kid who's really undecided, which is fine at this point? Big versus small, et cetera, et cetera. The kid who lives in North Carolina and says, I just don't want to be cold. Okay, well, let's look at the Mason-Dixon line and south. And one of the first places we go is this prospective colleges area. And actually, I want to skip over to, so again, here's our end, but you have more interest over here. When you go in, or your son or daughter goes in, it's going to look like this. The sheet I gave you is our initial sort of introduction to the website for parents and students. And one of the reasons I handed this out is to show you that this is it as far as paper introduction for you all, because the website itself is really, really intuitive. We don't need to give you a booklet for you to be able to navigate this thing. In fact, what we use this white space in here, and probably the biggest hurdle we have to get over, is just giving everybody access codes so they can get in the site, so they're just looking at their kids' data. You notice back here, I am, of course, looking at, a lot of kids on it, I'm looking at every single student I have and can get to all of their grades and scores. But if we're dealing with your section, you are just going to be looking, if your daughter was Mary Charger, you're just going to be looking at Mary's information, of course. So, first thing we do with the kids is, actually, I'm going to show you my daughter's first because it's a little bit more complete. we do this with both kids and parents. So here's my daughter. She's a senior, and this was my oldest. And even though I do this for a living, and as I tell people, I sort of, I've read the rules on the back of the box. It was still, tough. I mean, I knew the process, but I mean, sort of the emotions that get into it. Even though I've done this with thousands of kids, it's very different when you do it with your own daughter. Luckily, we have another counselor in the office, so I didn't have to be her counselor. I got to be her parent, but it was still rough stuff. Anyways, first thing we do is when the kids have to log on, we sort of make them create their account in order to have their first meeting with us. And a lot of schools get this started in sophomore year. So with Pine Lake, I would assume that either sophomore year or junior year, you'd be getting your access codes and getting in here. The kid has to sign in before she has her first meeting with us, and then they'll probably have it set up where you have to log in and do a couple of tasks before you have your first meeting, just as incentive to make sure we capture everybody. But we start with this thing, and Pine Lake will do the same, with a junior questionnaire. This is really our first kind of detailed work that we do with the kids. And as you see from our instructions, the answers to these questions, we ask them a bunch of questions, 37 questions, and every school is going to have slightly different questions, the amount of information they want, how they ask their questions. But a lot of it will be sort of name, rank, and serial number, parents' names, et cetera, et cetera. Then we get into bigger questions. What jobs have you held? What do you do to relax? What do you consider your greatest strengths and talents? Talk about academic strengths. Talk about specific moments, interesting moments in your life. Brag a little bit, biggest disappointment. And of course, at the end, this kind of kicks off the college talk. What schools are you interested in? And then things like, as I was just saying, big versus small, what part of the country, do you know what you want to study, et cetera, et cetera. From that, and then you do the same thing. We have a parent questionnaire that's shorter, but you can give all of this information. From that, we start the college list. So we're in the About Me tab there. And now we move over to the Colleges tab. This is probably the area of the site, once it gets rolling, that you will spend your most time with, working with the college list. And during possibly as early as sophomore year, but probably more junior year, you and your child and your counselor together will start working on this colleges I'm thinking about list. And actually, let's go back to Mary Charger, because she's got a more interesting list. Sarah Blaze. Okay, so here's back to our fictional Mary Charger student. And she's answered all those questions. And sometimes the student who is on the ball goes in there first and starts with all these things. Sometimes it's the parent who is kind of driving the bus a little bit more. Sometimes it's the counselor. But as you can see from who added these schools on here, the parent hasn't been on yet to throw in his or her suggestions. But again, this is happening probably anywhere from November of junior year on, where we're just kind of amassing possibilities. One of the things that we certainly advocate, and I'm sure your counselors will do the same thing, early in the process, let's think of all possibilities. All right. Now, if we have, if you and your family have very specific thoughts about staying relatively close by, or if your son or daughter has a very, very specific major, they just want to study, marine biology in the Southeast, there's not going to be a heck of a lot of possibilities. That can kind of, shrink the list. But if